Let's talk about Tylenol-Gate. So obviously by now I'm sure you've heard the whole thing about Tylenol causing autism when a pregnant mom takes it. It kind of just appeared out of the blue. Trump just mentioned it. I think at the Charlie Kirk Memorial, he was saying, we're going to have some potential news. And again, what's really weird about this is like this just came out of the blue, like just non sequitur. Nothing that was going on in society had anything to do with Tylenol, anything to do with autism whatsoever. And then just out of the blue, this whole pregnant woman pregnant women taking Tylenol is like a big issue suddenly, which to me is just bizarre. It was really bizarre. So, obviously, he gave that whole speech and he was saying, pregnant women shouldn't take Tylenol. And then he had like women come up who talked about their experiences raising somebody with autism. And like the whole thing was just so contrived and bizarre. Like, I don't know. I find it bizarre, right? Again, the fact that this whole thing was non sequitur, came out of the blue, like nobody asked for this. So what I want to do right now is I want to read. The FDA actually responded to this, and this is a response for immediate release on September 22nd, 2025, which I believe is like the day after, somewhere around that time frame. So I'm just going to quickly read this, so bear with me. There might be, yeah, okay. So the U.S. Food and Drug Administration today initiated the process for a label change for acetaminophen (parentheses Tylenol and similar products) end parentheses to reflect evidence suggesting that the use of acetaminophen by pregnant women may be associated with an increased risk of neurological conditions such as autism and ADHD in children. The agency also issued a related letter alerting physicians nationwide. The FDA is taking action to make parents and doctors aware of a considerable body of evidence about potential, remember that, potential risks associated with acetaminophen, said FDA Commissioner Marty Makery, MD, MPH. Even with this body of evidence, the choice still belongs with parents. The precautionary principle may lead many to avoid using acetaminophen during pregnancy, especially since most low-grade fevers don't require treatment. It remains reasonable, however, for pregnant women to use acetaminophen in certain scenarios. Evidence in recent years has suggested a correlation between acetaminophen use during pregnancy and subsequent diagnosis of conditions like autism and ADHD. Multiple large scale cohort studies, including the Nurses Health Study 2 and the Boston Birth Cohort, find this association. Excuse me. Some studies have described that the risk may be most pronounced when acetaminophen is taken chronically throughout the pregnancy. Remember that part too. It is important to note that while an association between acetaminophen and neurological conditions has been described in many studies, a causal relationship or a causal relationship has not been established, and there are contrary studies in the scientific literature. So, in other words, like there are contradictory studies. Some studies say no, some studies say maybe. That's what that means. It is also noted that acetaminophen is the only over-the-counter drug approved for use to treat fevers during pregnancy, and high fevers in pregnant women can pose a risk to their children. Additionally, aspirin and ibuprofen have well-documented adverse impacts on the fetus. So basically, that whole mouthful, that whole response from the FDA is them basically saying there could be a potential association, right? But there's no causal evidence. So, in statistics, there's a difference between, an association and causal evidence. And in order for something to be causal, you need to have a certain value that is considered significant. So like when you hear these like, nerdy statisticians talk about all these terms like p values and standard deviations and, significance and so on and so forth, the reason all of that exists for scenarios like this where you can actually so that you could determine causal relationships between x and y, right? Again, this is like an association potentially, maybe, but this isn't causal. So going back to the fact that this whole thing was just out of the blue, it was just non sequitur. When I say non sequitur, I mean just like, society was focused on the whole Charlie Kirk thing, which seems like ancient history at this point. And then, we were thinking about things completely unrelated, and then just out of the blue, non sequitur, he talks about Tylenol and autism, right? Nobody asked for it, nobody, and I'm not saying that there is no association or there isn't. I'm just literally reading what the FDA said, and there are a couple things that I want to extrapolate from this. So first of all, okay, it remains reasonable. This line right here. Or sorry, this line. It was the one. Yeah, okay. Some studies have described that the risk may be most pronounced when acetaminophen is taken chronically throughout pregnancy. So think about it. There's like a little chicken and egg scenario here where, well, okay, why does a mom need to, or a pregnant woman, a potential mom, need to take acetaminophen chronically, like more often than a woman who just takes it, kind of here and there while she's pregnant? Well, because she probably feels the need to. So there's something going on in that pregnancy, potentially, maybe, where there's more pain. There's some sort of complication there. There's an underlying complication, potentially, that's causing her to want to take acetaminophen. What if that underlying complication potentially causes things like ADHD or autism, right? We don't know. I'm not saying that's what it is, but I'm saying that's another possibility. Also, the problem with saying there's an association here is we've all heard this fact that a lot of the statistics increase, like the diagnosis increase in ADHD and autism, is just because more people are being discovered to have it, because more people are actually going in to potentially get diagnosed. So, of course, it's not that the rates necessarily are going up, at whatever value that they are. It's just the rate of diagnosis is going up. So there's like a weird, ironic relationship here that I thought about. So let's say that over time, the body of evidence that suggests, just like the very last sentence, that suggests that aspirin and ibuprofen have well-documented adverse impacts on the fetus, that becomes more solidified over time. So what happens is, over time, more and more pregnant women take Tylenol because that's been proven to be mostly safe. Well, so you're going to see an increase in Tylenol use from pregnant women over time because that's the one that they've determined is the most safe to take. But at the same time, you're going to see also an increase in diagnosis of autism, and ADHD, right? So you're going to see an increase of the diagnosis of autism and ADHD, and you're going to see an increase of women taking Tylenol because that's the one that just so happens to be the safe one to take. But these are just literally coincidental. And then if somebody sees that both of these are going up over time, they might, draw that conclusion. Oh my gosh, look, Tylenol, it's causing more autism, it's causing more ADHD. But it's like, well, no. I mean, ironically, it could actually be the opposite, where Tylenol is the one that's safest for pregnant women to take. So more of them over time take that. But, coincidentally, also, just more people are being looked at in general in terms of potentially being diagnosed for ADHD or autism. So they're not related, but they just happen to be happening at the same time, right? So again, like, that's another thing to consider here. That's why you can't just look at the rate of one thing and the rate of the other and think like, okay, these are 100% linked, right? You can't do that. Okay. Another thing too, you've probably seen this picture floating around. It's like a screenshot, ostensibly from Tylenol. You know, 8 years ago apparently, where they responded to somebody and said we don't recommend that pregnant women take Tylenol, something like that. And then now everybody is like sharing that screenshot. First of all, I don't even know if that's who knows if that's even legit. But second of all, even if it is legit, like on the bottle itself, I have a bottle laying around somewhere. On the bottle itself, on the back, if you read it, it says, in terms of pregnant women taking Tylenol, it says consult a physician first. It doesn't say, yeah, you're fine to take it. Consult a physician. So that's basically like saying, don't take this until you talk to a doctor. Okay. And another thing you have to, so they're basically saying that on the bottle, anyways. And another thing that you have to remember is that supplement companies, drug companies, medications, they all, by virtue of just standard industry practice, tell women to not take their product a lot of the time, like to either not take their product or to consult a physician before taking their product. It's standard industry practice, and the reason is because it's a liability issue, right? It's a liability safety net that they establish ahead of time in case there are potential pregnancy complications. They want to be able to say, like, we said don't take it, or we said consult a physician first. So it's like shifting liability, right? It doesn't mean that there's any sort of causal evidence that supplement or medicine will cause some sort of adverse effect on the fetus. It just means that they are establishing some sort of safety net ahead of time because they want to cover their asses, which I guess is understandable, right? And this is whether or not, again, there's causal evidence. It doesn't matter. Like, they're going to say that it's standard industry practice. It really is. So if it's standard industry practice to do this in the first place, then why are people even talking about it, right? It doesn't really make any sense. So that's my thoughts. So, like, yeah, just clearing everything up here. It looks like there's no hard evidence. There's maybe an association. I'm not saying there is one way or another. I don't know. But right now there's no solid evidence. It is bizarre that just non sequitur, out of the blue, we just start talking about this when there's not even causal evidence for it. It is kind of weird, right? I don't know what the fixation with autism is too. Like, I guess with the administration is kind of bizarre too. But anyways, thank you for watching, guys. Have a good day. Bye.